So we've got Adele in Oakland who helped us out before the show to make sure the phones were working. We'll assume they still are. How are you, Adele?
Doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing well, Adele.
Not bad at all.
Well, first, before I get to my question, I just really wanted to thank everybody at the Atheist Experience for what you do and having these discussions, because I think it's really important. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So my question is, during a discussion with Christians, it could be any theist, but particularly for this example, Christians, I get to a point, or they get to a point where they don't know how to defend their logic.
Mm-hmm.
So they say something to the effect of, well, God's ways are higher than ours.
Yeah, how do they know that?
They'll answer a question. Right, well, how do they know that? Right, but I don't know a way to refute that doesn't make it seem like I'm attacking them, because then the discussion at that point would just end, and that's not what I want.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a good answer that'll keep it from, I mean, you can't do anything if somebody feels attacked. It's in some sense, it's understandable. I mean, these are issues that they take to heart. In some senses, it's ridiculous because, why would you need to feel offended or hurt on behalf of God? How could I possibly wound a God? And why isn't your God giving you better ammunition for these conversations? I think maybe you should take it up with him. But when they say something like God's ways are higher than our ways, well, they might as well just say, well, I'm right. They're functionally the same. Yeah. They're just saying, this is what I think about God, and when pressed on it, I'm just going to reassert that God's way is correct. And you can ask them, how do you know that, or why do you believe that? But at the end of the day, they're just saying that they're right, and they're not demonstrating it.
Well, then at that point, I bring up the idea of, okay, well, you say it's a personal experience with God, that's just how you know. Mm-hmm. You know his ways are higher than ours, and it's something you just have to experience personally.
Yeah. And
I can, at that point, get them to even agree that somebody from a different religion feels the exact same way.
Right.
But at that point, they just still think they're right, and you can't get past that.
Okay, one of the questions I think you could ask, because so far as I can tell, you're doing it exactly the way I would, or the way I would think would be right.
Yeah. It would be my next question for sure to ask about someone else that feels the same way.
Exactly. And so then the question I would go to after that is, when you tell me these things, do you think that I should be convinced based on you saying them? Because
that's a good, okay.
If this is a personal thing to them, they may not be in any position to say, this is what I believe, and you should believe it too. If instead they're just wanting to tell you what they believe, that's not a conversation. That's not a dialogue. It's not a discussion. It's just, here's what I believe. If they can't do the why, and more importantly, not only why do they believe, but why should other people believe, then maybe there's not much benefit to that conversation about that specific topic, and instead the conversation needs to shift to, okay, you believe something, I believe something. I think that what I believe is an accurate representation of the reality we both share. So ideally, if we were both being rational, we would agree. We don't agree, and so I'm willing to try to convince you of why I'm convinced. I would like to think that for most of the things that I believe, they should be demonstrable. That is, if I believe, climate change is happening, and here's my reasons for thinking it's happening, here's my reasons for what I think the causes are, that's something I could demonstrate. Outside of this God claim, do we ever run across very many people who are saying things like, here's what I believe and I have no interest in demonstrating it, or this notion of, here's what I believe, but I'm not going to bother to tell you why, and I really don't care if you believe in it, and this conversation is kind of, we just don't do that. And at no point...
They think they're in the position where they don't have to demonstrate it.
Well, that's the other thing, is when we talk about, hey, income inequality, do we just say, I'm convinced that there's income inequality because I'm convinced of it? And then expect people to agree? I mean, we don't use that type of thing in any sort of other discussion. We can disagree about the reliability of data or the sources. We can disagree about the extent to which something is a problem. But we don't tend to say, I hope, this is what I believe. You should probably believe it too. I really wish you would, but I'm not going to bother to present any evidence or argument or whatever.
Yeah,
you're absolutely correct. Bringing up the real world examples when you're trying to have a rational argument, but it always comes back to, well, they can somehow see the real world examples and agree that that logic shouldn't be used to come to conclusions for those things. But in the end, when you try to apply that to their reasoning for belief in God or something in the Bible, it always comes back to, well, his ways are higher than ours. And so they can't seem to apply the logic to everyday life to their belief.
Well, another kind of a piece of that, you were talking earlier about how they came to this belief because they had an experience, their own personal experience, and they weren't necessarily interested in convincing you, and they may understand that may not convince you, but they are convinced because it's a personal experience. But my question to them would be, well, how reliable is that for figuring out what's actually true, what's actually representative of reality? Because if they had that experience and they take that as true, so their belief and their deity, their specific one, whatever denomination, if they adhere to one, this is true. But then someone else comes on with a completely different belief. They have their own experience, and so they believe what they have is true. Is that really the most reliable method that they have to figure out what is true? Because if two differing religious individuals are coming to their own conclusions and they are not compatible with each other, these religions are not compatible with each other, how do we go about figuring out which one of y'all actually has it correct? What method can we use to start getting into, well, which one of you have it right? What else can we do? Because your experience was obviously not enough, because y'all both had an experience and arrived at this conclusion that you're both true.
There's another way to get them to recognize that what they're saying is essentially useless, and that is, how would you feel if I told you that I'm convinced that my ways are higher than God's ways?
Exactly. And I have the same amount of evidence and the same line of thinking, but they always say, well, I just know.
Okay.
And that's good enough for them. And I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know how I use those examples. And they can even agree with the example of somebody else can arrive to their own truth through the same line of thinking. And they just say, well, I know it's true.
Yep. This is why I talk about beliefs don't live in a vacuum. The process by which you reach a conclusion can inform other conclusions. And somewhere in their brain is something that they are either fundamentally convinced must be the case for reasons that they are convinced are good, or they are, in some cases, convinced that it's beneficial and wise for them to say that they believe that it must be the case. And so there's a roadblock there, and the conversation you're currently having may have nothing to do with that thing that is blocking them from realizing that they have a flawed premise in their head.
Okay.
And so this is one of the things, if you're not making progress in one area, you take a step back and you go, okay, let's have a conversation about truth. Do you care about truth, or are you more concerned with, whether an idea is comfortable, whether it's popular, whether it feels right? How would we go about? Is there some, to go with John Loftus's outsider test for faith, is there something that we could do to show that your understanding of your experience or your belief is actually true rather than just individually accepted as true? And I found, there's a guy I did a discussion with Ravi Zacharias Ministries on Monday. I'm hoping to get the video of that up soon. And there are definitely things that he and I agree upon. I mean, we agree that we share a reality. It may be the case that you have to start there. It may be the case that you have to say, okay, do we agree that we share a reality? Because if we don't, I don't know where to go from that point. But if we do, then we should be able to agree step by step towards reaching some conclusion. It's really, you're forced to do all the work that we've done in epistemology over thousands of years, where we would normally try to ride on the shoulders of the people who came before us. In some cases, you can't do that. You need to say, okay, Phil, you and I agree that we share a reality. Let's pick something else that we think is true, that we're both convinced is true, like that's a coffee cup. And talk about how we got to the point where we can agree that that's a coffee cup, and then go to another example. And now let's pick something we don't agree on, and we can show that I'm consistent in using this methodology to figure out whether or not something is reasonable to accept, and you have now introduced something new. And if you find the new thing that they've introduced, whether it be personal experience or blah, 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 then it's worthwhile to show that that is unreliable. It doesn't show that they're wrong. This is the thing that we need to drill into people's heads. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that you can't show that you're right, and that you should not base your view on this flawed foundation. It would be the same as if somebody said, I believe God's ways are higher than my ways because I flipped a coin, and heads God's ways are higher than my ways, and tails they're not. And so I'm just going to go with the coin toss. And so then you need to show how unreliable a coin toss can be. Would you like your civil liberties to be based on the toss of a coin? I wouldn't.
I totally agree with that example, and that was something that I was thinking about too. If you can just say, because this is how I feel, would you want policy based on that without actual evidence that is based on logic? And I think you brought up a really great point that made me see it from a different perspective, which is it isn't even at the point where they feel that they can convince you that they're right, but they're convinced that the reason they hold the beliefs are because it's good or it's wise, and they might even value truth, and they believe from their perspective that that's why it's okay to say that they believe it without something that would convince somebody else. I don't know if that makes sense, but I thought that was very insightful, and that helped me a lot. Yeah,
best of luck with the conversation. And if you find a way to progress better, if you make progress on this front, by all means, call us back or email TV at Atheist-Community and let us know how it goes, because I've been hosting this show for 14 plus years, and I'm not convinced that I've had loads of conversations like this that don't necessarily get anywhere, and some do. And it's going to come down to the fact that people believe for different reasons, and different things are going to help people out.
And even if people actually want to have that conversation, because some people don't really want to have that conversation. Just today at the giveaway, I was approached with someone whose tagline was "The truth is God," and that's just what he has. And so we exchanged email addresses because he wanted to talk with me more in-depthly. But as I told him, we really didn't get anywhere, because he wasn't really interested in having a conversation at all versus expounding why he's convinced that this is the case. And it was kind of nonsensical, but he wanted to continue the conversation. So we'll see how that goes, but he wasn't interested. I don't have high hopes for the production of that.
God equals truth would totally mess up the math on the meme that I posted the other day, where somebody was like, truth plus God equals life. And then, you can move God over the other side, so that truth equals life minus God. And now if God equals truth, now it's truth plus truth equals life. Or God plus God equals life. God and truth are now equal. It's awful. And that's the thing is, there are ways to be succinct, to turn something into a bumper sticker, to engage in a little bit of poetry or sophistry in a way that appeals to people, and it feels like they've learned something deep and significant and true. And I always go back to the phrase that Dan Dennett taught me, which is a deepity, which is something that appears to be true, but to the extent that it is true, it is trivial, and to the extent that it is significant, it is in fact false. Like love is all you need. That sounds, love is all you need. Love is all we need, Phil. Actually, I need a lot more than love. I need food and oxygen and stuff like that. So to the extent that it's true, it's kind of a trivial thing. And to the extent that it is deep and significant, it's actually false.
I just really appreciate you talking about this, because I think you understand, the point that I'm at, where I don't know how to have the conversation go past where it is. And you made a great point that maybe at this point they're really not interested in having any further discussion or further in their logic, or trying to really validate their claims. They just want to stay within a community that's going to uphold their beliefs no matter what, is just what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's one last thing I'll add on here, and then we're gonna go take some theistic callers who've been waiting, and that's this. The fact that you haven't had success at changing somebody's mind in a discussion doesn't necessarily mean they're closed off. It may be that you're not the one that is going to change their mind, or you're not the one that's going to change their mind today, because the first time we hear something, it's just strange and shrugged off. And the second time we hear it, it's, hey, I think I've heard something like that. And the third time is when you get to a pattern. And if they're still in the mode of, this whole non-belief thing is just weird, then they're not in a position where they can even really begin to process what you're talking about. Or it could be that there's a personality conflict. where they're just you're never going to make any progress with them. Somebody else could come along and say the same thing, and because they say it differently, or because they have a mustache,
or how they view the other person they're talking with.
It could be any number of things. Just appearance or whatever. It has more of an impact, or maybe it's going to be somebody that they care about more. It's like how many anti-marriage equality politicians didn't change their view until somebody in their family came out as gay.
Right. Then all of a sudden,
it became personal.
Yeah.
Right,
you could have argued with them forever and not changed their mind. And then when it became personal, and this is why, even though I don't tend to use the problem of evil as an argument against God, because I think there are some responses to it, I understand that many people do, and it's very impactful, because as soon as you start talking, to a parent who's lost a child, for example, and asking how that could happen in a world with the type of God that they believe in, that can be hugely significant. Whereas for me, even when I was a believer, that would have had no bearing at all, because I understood and accepted particular apologetics, and I hadn't had a child die.
Yeah.
Oof. All right. Well, I just brought that down to the to the bottom, but I appreciate the call, Adele, and let us know how it goes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's the conversations are difficult.
Yeah, they can be. They really can be. And as you were saying, like, even though in this case Adele, she may not be the one to actually get them to realize what goes on. Maybe they may come across this show later on and us discussing about this, or hear it from somebody else that maybe there was a seed that was planted, or at least they can acknowledge that someone else is able to live their life without a deity and still be just fine and still be a productive member of society. And you've shown them that you can be that. And so maybe down the line things will change. But
I think it's an issue that needs to be attacked and addressed on all fronts, which is why the charity efforts are one thing, because it changes people's perceptions of non-believers.
Sure.
Having different programs and different hosts on the programs. I mean, you and I have different styles at this, and Talk Heathen feels different from Atheist Experience, except when I'm on it, evidently. And then it feels like we've got an extended Atheist Experience because I'm just going to do what I do. But that's the thing is, I think that if you don't have to remain calm all the time. You don't have to show no emotion. You also don't have to go into a rant at the drop of a hat, says the guy who has frequently ranted. I think that there are many different approaches, because people believe for different reasons, and they're going to find their way out for different reasons, and some of them aren't going to find their way out at all. And that's frustrating, because these are people that we care about, people that we know are not idiots. I mean, these are reasonable, intelligent people who have, for some reason or another, a belief that doesn't seem to be justified from our view, that they don't seem to be able to demonstrate.